hadn't seen Willow Bay in almost 10 years, but the moment the bus pulled up to the old gas station on Main Street, I knew nothing had changed except me. The windows were fogged from the cold, but I could still make out the outline of the library, the church steeple, and the rusted "Welcome to Willow Bay" sign that had always hung crooked. The same potholes scarred the road, and the air smelled like salt and pine needles. For a second, I could almost believe I was 17 again, back from a school trip, except I wasn't. I was 26, pregnant, alone, and carrying everything I owned in a backpack and a second-hand duffel. The driver gave me a long look as I stepped off. "You sure this is your stop, sweetheart?" His eyes flicked to my stomach, not quite showing yet under the layers of my coat, but I guess some things are hard to hide. I nodded. "Yeah, this is it." He didn't say anything else, just closed the doors and pulled away, leaving me standing on the gravel shoulder, shivering in the wind. I stood there for a moment, hands tucked deep in my coat pockets, staring at the street ahead of me. The last place on earth I wanted to return to, and the only place I had left. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was going to graduate, get my degree in literature, maybe teach in Boston or Portland. I was going to fall in love the right way, have a baby the right way, with a partner who didn't suddenly decide he wasn't ready. But that fantasy had ended 3 months ago on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Kirill, yes, that was really his name, looked me dead in the eye and said, "This isn't what I want, Sarah." He had offered money, a check I never cashed. I left his apartment that night with my coat soaked through and a lump in my throat the size of Maine itself. I had nowhere else to go. My mother died when I was 6. I never knew my father. My Aunt Eleanor was the only family I had, and we hadn't spoken in years. But when you're pregnant, broke, and 2 weeks from homelessness, pride isn't something you get to keep. Her porch light was off when I climbed the wooden steps. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Finally, the door creaked open just a few inches, revealing the same sharp face I remembered from childhood, only older, colder. She didn't even pretend to smile. "Well, look what the storm dragged in," she said, eyeing my stomach. I suppose the rumors were true. I tried to speak, tried to explain that I wasn't asking for much, just a couch for a few weeks, maybe a warm meal. "You can't stay here, Sarah. I have a reputation in this town. I'm a retired teacher. A single girl with a belly isn't the kind of attention I need." Her voice was crisp, practiced, as if she had rehearsed this. "But I'm family," I whispered. "No, you were a burden. And I warned you before you ran off to college with all your poetry books and big dreams. This world eats girls like you alive." She shut the door before I could answer. I stood there on the porch, shaking, not sure if it was from the wind or from the rage rising up my spine. I should have cried. I didn't. I just turned and walked down the steps, past the flower beds she used to weed with surgical precision, past the gravel path lined with garden gnomes. I kept walking until my legs ached, until the wind had sliced through every layer of clothing I had. By the time I saw the wooden gate and the house behind it, small, weather-beaten, but with lights on inside, I was half delirious with cold. I didn't even knock. I just leaned over the gate and called out, "Hello? I'm sorry, does anyone have water? I'll pay, please." A voice called back, firm but not unkind. "Water doesn't cost anything in this house." The door opened and a woman stepped onto the porch. Her hair was silver and pinned up. She wore a quilted robe and slippers, but something about her posture reminded me of someone who used to give orders for a living. She looked me up and down, her eyes resting on my face, then my stomach, then the tears I didn't realize had finally begun to fall. "You're not from around here," she said. "Actually, I am," I whispered. "My name's Sarah Whitman. I used to live on Rose Street. My aunt's Eleanor Whitman." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Eleanor, of course." She opened the gate and nodded toward the warm light behind her. "Come inside, then. You look like you're about to collapse." I hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." "Oh, honey," she said, almost chuckling. "You already have. But lucky for you, I don't mind." That night, I slept in a stranger's house, in a room that smelled like apples and old books, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. The woman's name was Hazel Whitmore, and as I would learn later, she had once been a high school biology teacher, the kind who terrified students into remembering the periodic table for life. Her house sat on a gentle slope overlooking the bay, surrounded by gnarled apple trees that still held the scent of autumn even in early winter. Inside, it smelled of cinnamon, tea leaves, and something else I couldn't quite place, like the past refusing to fade. The morning after she let me in, Hazel poured me a cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar, and said, "If you're staying here, you'll earn your keep. I'm too old to shovel snow and chase squirrels off the porch. Think you can manage that with a baby on board?" "I can manage," I said, and I meant it. That same week, I took the town bus, an old yellow school bus they repurposed, to the district office and applied for a teaching position. The woman behind the desk looked up when I walked in, her eyes pausing for a beat too long on the slight swell of my stomach beneath my sweater. "You're the Whitman girl," she said. "Not a question. Just fact." I nodded. "Sarah Whitman. I had just finished my degree. English, literature." "Didn't you go off to college?" she asked, as if it was a betrayal. "I graduated. I'm looking for work." She flipped through a stack of folders with long, manicured nails that clicked like metronomes. "Zion Ridge Middle School needs a substitute for 8th grade literature. Temporary. Starts Monday. You want it?" I said yes before she even finished the sentence. Monday morning, I stood in front of a class of 13-year-olds who stared at me like I was a zoo exhibit. I wore my best thrift store cardigan, the one without any missing buttons, and wrote my name on the board in block letters. Ms. Whitman. One of the boys raised his hand. "Are you, like, pregnant?" The room went still. I paused for half a breath. "Yes," I said. "Now open your books. We're reading of mice and men." That first week was brutal. The kids tested me every day, side whispers, gum stuck under desks, eye rolls, bold sarcasm. I went home sore, exhausted, and doubting myself more than I'd ever admit. But every evening, Hazel would be waiting with a warm bowl of stew or apple pie she claimed was nothing special, even though it was always exactly what I needed. She never pried, never asked about the baby's father, never made me feel like a charity case. Instead, she handed me a list of chores, told me which days to refill the bird feeder and which plants needed trimming in the greenhouse, and said, "Idle hands make for anxious hearts, Sarah, and I reckon you've had enough of that." One night, about 2 weeks in, I found her sitting by the fireplace holding a faded photo of a young man in uniform. "My son," she said before I could ask, "killed overseas. He was 22. I didn't know what to say, just sat beside her and let the silence do the talking. The next morning, she handed me a spare set of keys and muttered, "Just in case you come home later than me, not that I'm waiting up." In the quiet moments, grading essays by lamplight, stirring soup on the stovetop, folding baby clothes I'd found at Goodwill, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Calm. Not peace, not yet, but calm. A stillness inside me that wasn't fear or dread. One evening, after class, I walked past the teacher's lounge and heard my name. That new girl, Whitman. Already knocked up. "Town always attracts strays," someone said, followed by low laughter. I didn't stop. I didn't cry. I just walked right past them and out the door into the cold, into the dark that smelled like salt water and frozen earth, and I breathed because I had somewhere to go. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't lost. Hazel's porch light was glowing. The smoke from her chimney curled into the night sky like a signpost. And when I stepped inside, her voice called from the kitchen, "You hungry?" I was. But more than that, I was home. It started with the wind. Not the kind that rattles a few windows or tosses a leaf across the porch, but the kind that howls like something alive. That week, the news had warned of a nor'easter blowing in. the kind that shuts down the coastal roads and knocks out power lines across half of Maine. But I wasn't worried about the storm. I was focused on making it through the next few weeks without going into labor. The baby wasn't due for another 10 days. It was late January. The snow had been falling all day, quiet and thick, blanketing Willow Bay in silence. Hazel had made shepherd's pie for dinner and insisted I eat 2 servings. "You're eating for 2," she said, "and one of you looks like he's already stealing your spine." We laughed. It was the first time in days that I'd felt light again. For a moment, I believed I'd make it through the rest of the pregnancy without drama, without chaos, without pain. I went to bed around 9. The house creaked and groaned in the wind, but it felt warm, safe. I curled up under 3 layers of quilts and closed my eyes. The pain hit at 2:12 a.m. Not a cramp, not pressure. This was something else. Sharp, deep. I bolted upright, gasping, one hand clutching the edge of the mattress, the other on my belly. Then came the second wave. My breath caught in my throat. I swung my legs over the bed and stood, but my knees buckled and I grabbed the dresser to keep from falling. "Not now," I whispered. "Please, not now." Then my water broke. I shuffled down the hall, barefoot and panicked, leaving a trail behind me on the wooden floor. I knocked on Hazel's door, too gently at first. No answer. I knocked again, harder. She opened the door within seconds, hair tousled, eyes wide. She took one look at me and said, "Damn it." "We need to get to the hospital," I choked out. "I know," she said, already grabbing her coat. "Shoes. You need shoes." The power had gone out sometime during the night. The wind screamed outside, snow swirling so thick we could barely see the end of the porch. Hazel grabbed her flashlight and her old flip phone. No signal. "Landline's dead," she muttered. "Cell towers probably down. Stay put." She ran to the neighbor's house. 10 minutes later, headlights cut through the storm like a lifeline. The old blue pickup belonged to Pops Peterson, Hazel's grumpy, widowed neighbor. A former cab driver, now pushing 70 with a permanent scowl and a soft spot for stray animals, and apparently for heavily pregnant girls in blizzards. He shouted over the wind as he helped me into the passenger seat. "Hang on tight, sweetheart. Got 5 births under my belt already. You'll be number 6 if we don't hit a tree." I could barely reply. Every contraction came like a wave crashing into my spine. Hazel climbed in beside me, holding my hand, murmuring words I couldn't hear but desperately needed. Her grip was warm, solid, anchoring me to the world. The drive was a blur of headlights, snow, and potholes. Pops cursed every other word but kept the wheel steady. I focused on breathing, counting between contractions, trying not to scream. When I couldn't hold it in anymore, Hazel just said, "Let it out, Sarah. Let it out." When we reached the hospital, a nurse rushed out with a wheelchair. They rolled me inside while Hazel stayed to argue with the front desk about emergency protocols. The nurse's voice was calm and sharp. "How far apart are your contractions?" 2 minutes, I gasped. "Maybe less." "You're ready," she said, almost too calmly. "Let's go." They wheeled me down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. The lights flickered. My world narrowed to pain and breathing and pushing. 6 hours later, I heard it a cry so loud and fierce it cracked through every cell in my body. They placed him on my chest, tiny, red-faced, angry at the world. And in that moment, the pain evaporated. He blinked up at me, fists curled tight. "My son, Jack," I whispered. "Hi, baby. I'm your mama." I didn't cry until later. Not when he was born. Not when they cleaned him or stitched me up. But when they took him to the nursery for checks, and I was left alone in the silence of the recovery room, that's when it hit me. I had done it. Not the easy way. Not the right way. But my way. And then through the thin wall to the room next door, I heard it. Not a baby crying, but a woman. Sobbing. Desperate. Fractured. And I had no idea. that her pain would soon become part of my story too. They brought Jack back to me just before sunrise, bundled tightly in a blue-striped blanket, his face pink and peaceful. He latched again like he'd been doing it his whole life, stubborn and hungry. "You've got lungs like a prize fighter," I whispered, brushing a finger along his cheek. "You're going to be just fine." But I couldn't stop thinking about the crying from the room next door. It was a sound that clung to me, even in moments of joy, like a question I wasn't supposed to ask. Later that morning, a nurse came in, the same one who'd helped deliver Jack. Her name tag read Lisa, RN. She was probably in her mid-40s, hair pulled into a bun that had given up halfway through the night. She smiled at Jack, then glanced around like she didn't want anyone else to hear. "You doing okay?" I nodded. "We're good." She hesitated. "I shouldn't tell you this, but the baby next door, she's not doing well. The mother left, just vanished, left a note and everything." I felt my stomach tighten. "The baby's alone. She was born premature, tiny, lungs aren't strong. She's not taking formula, not responding well to 4. It's not looking great." Lisa sighed and sat on the edge of my bed. "They named her Ava. Her dad's been sitting by her crib all night. Hasn't said a word." "Where's the mom?" "No idea. She was gone before we even checked her vitals. Said she wasn't ready to be a parent to a sick baby." Her voice cracked on the last 2 words. I looked down at Jack. He was fast asleep now, his little hand curled around the collar of my gown. "Can I see her?" I asked quietly. Lisa blinked. "Ava, I just want to see her." She didn't answer right away. Then, after a moment, she stood. "I'll check with the NICU, but don't get your hopes up." An hour later, they wheeled me into a quiet room with machines that beeped in slow, uncertain rhythms. In the middle was a plastic bassinet, and inside it a bundle so small, so fragile, I almost missed her. Ava. She looked like she'd been folded out of paper. Translucent skin. Eyelids so thin I could see the blue of her veins. Her breath came in shallow pulls, lips barely parting. Her fists never curled. Her chest barely moved. "She won't eat," Lisa said beside me, soft as snow. "She won't take the bottle. We've tried everything." I didn't ask permission. I just held out my arms. They placed her against my chest, and I waited. At first, nothing. But then, just barely, her head turned, her mouth opened, and her lips brushed against my skin. And she latched. Lisa gasped. "Oh my God, she's eating." Tears burned my eyes. I didn't speak, didn't move. I just stared at her, this tiny, unwanted life clinging to me as if I were the only thing she had left. And maybe I was. For the next hour, I fed both babies. Jack first, then Ava. They took turns without complaint. 2 little heartbeats. 2 warm weights pressed against me like promises I hadn't expected to make. Later, I heard footsteps at the door. I looked up and saw a man. Tall, early 30s, pale from exhaustion. Officer's jacket unzipped, snow still melting off his boots. His eyes went straight to the baby in my arms. His baby. "You're feeding her?" he asked, voice rough from not speaking. "Yes," I said simply. He stepped forward slowly, like he didn't trust the floor beneath him. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Ava's father." I nodded. "I'm Sarah, Jack's mom." He looked at Ava again, then at Jack in the crib beside us. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the bassinet. "I didn't know what to do," he whispered. "She just left. I thought I'd lose her too." "You won't," I said. "Not if we keep her warm. Keep her fed. Keep her loved." And for the first time, he believed me. After that day, everything changed, quietly at first. Jack and I were discharged 2 days later. My arms ached from holding him. My stitches pulled every time I moved, but none of that mattered, because I couldn't stop thinking about Ava, about her tiny lips parting in hunger, about how her body melted into mine like she belonged there as much as Jack did. Daniel called me the next evening. Hazel and I were sitting in the kitchen when the old landline rang, a sound I hadn't heard in years. She handed it to me with a raised brow. "Guy with a deep voice," she mouthed. "Didn't say his name." I pressed the receiver to my ear. "Hello. It's Daniel. From the hospital." My heart thudded once. "How's Ava?" "She's better. They're keeping her another week. But the nurses said she's eating more now. Gaining weight." "Good," I said, relieved. "I think it's because of you," he added. There was silence on the line. Not uncomfortable, just full. "I know it's a lot to ask," he said, "but would you come back? Just for feedings. Until she's strong enough. They said formula still doesn't work." I didn't hesitate. Of course. So for the next 7 days, I rode to the hospital every morning and every evening, Hazel watching Jack while I took that familiar drive to the NICU. The nurses began calling me Mama too. I pretended not to love it. Daniel would be waiting most days, awkward in the beginning, hovering in the corners. But every time I handed Ava over to him, his arms got steadier. One morning, I came home to find Hazel in the garden with Jack strapped to her chest in a makeshift sling she fashioned out of a curtain. "You're turning me into a grandmother," she muttered, pulling weeds. "And I haven't even yelled at you properly yet." But I could see it, the way she kissed the top of Jack's head when she thought no one was looking, the way her hands always reached for him before her words did. By the end of that week, Ava was strong enough to come home. Daniel stood on my porch that afternoon. Snow in his hair, Ava bundled in his arms. "I need help," he said, voice raw. "I live in a service house out near the edge of town. It's just me. The nights are long, and she sleeps best after you feed her." I stared at him, trying to read the lines between his words. This wasn't a proposal. It wasn't romance. It was need, honest and stripped down. "I can pay you," he added quickly. "You and Jack would have your own room. I'm not asking for anything more than help." "You don't need to pay me," I said. "Yes, I do," he said, "because I don't want to owe you kindness." That part I understood. Hazel helped me pack. "You're not running off," she warned. "You're helping someone breathe. Just don't forget how to breathe yourself." Daniel's house sat on a hill overlooking the bay, smaller than Hazel's, but just as old. It had 3 rooms and a porch that faced the water. The walls smelled like cedar. The windows fogged up when the kettle boiled. And there was peace in the way it felt lived in and unfinished. He gave Jack and me the biggest room. Ava's crib stayed in his. We didn't speak much those first few days. He worked long shifts. I stayed home with the babies. We moved around each other like ghosts. But some nights, after the babies were fed and the silence settled, I'd find him on the porch, arms crossed, eyes on the dark horizon. "You don't have to sit out here alone," I said once. "I do," he replied, "but thank you." That was the thing about Daniel. He didn't say much, but when he did, you felt it all. In those quiet weeks, we built something without realizing. A rhythm, a home, 2 babies, 2 people who didn't ask for this, but who showed up anyway. And somehow that was enough. February passed like a dream that tiptoed through snow. Slow mornings, the scent of formula and oatmeal, the soft rustle of diapers and lullabies humming through cold window panes. I found myself memorizing Ava's breathing, the way she curled her toes when startled, the sound Jack made when he laughed in his sleep. Daniel was always moving, shoveling the path, chopping wood, fixing the creaky steps on the porch. He never sat still unless Ava was asleep on his chest. Some nights, I'd peek into the living room and find them there, him in the armchair, her heartbeat steady against his, both of them drifting somewhere between exhaustion and peace. We didn't talk about the past. Not his, not mine. The silence between us wasn't cold anymore. It was a kind of sanctuary, a place to rest without being asked to explain. But there were moments. One night, the heater broke during a storm. We huddled in the living room with both babies pressed between us, wrapped in layers of blankets. Daniel handed me a mug of instant cocoa, his fingers brushing mine for a second too long. "I used to think I knew what strong meant," he said quietly. "Muscles, orders, saving people from drowning." I watched him through the flicker of candlelight. "But then Vanessa left," he continued, "and I was holding this tiny thing with a feeding tube and no mom, and I realized strong is staying when you're scared out of your mind." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "That's what you did, isn't it? Stayed, even when you didn't have to." I swallowed the lump in my throat. Maybe I didn't have anywhere else to go. He shook his head. "You could have gone back to the city, found your old life, a real job, someone else." I smiled faintly. Someone else wouldn't understand. The words hung between us like fog, warm and soft, impossible to hold. That night, we slept side by side on the living room floor, not touching, not speaking, just breathing together in the dark, two adults orbiting around the quiet gravity of two children who had no idea how broken we were trying not to be. Spring came reluctantly to Willow Bay. Patches of grass peeked through the snow, and crocuses fought their way up through frozen soil. Daniel returned to work, full-time with the Coast Guard. I found a part-time job at the local library, cataloging books and reading stories to toddlers every Tuesday. Hazel came by once a week to fuss over Jack and scold me for never eating enough. "You look like a candle," she muttered, putting more mashed potatoes on my plate than I could finish. Ava learned to smile in April. It was crooked at first, like she was still deciding if the world was worth trusting. But when she looked at Daniel, her whole face lit up. Jack learned to crawl in May. I caught him trying to climb into Ava's crib one morning, his chubby hands gripping the bars with determination. She reached up and grabbed his hair. Neither of them cried. One Sunday, we took a walk down by the bay. Daniel pushed Ava in the stroller while I carried Jack in a sling against my chest. The tide was low, and we stopped to watch the boats rock gently at the dock. "I don't know what this is," Daniel said, eyes still on the water, "but I don't want to lose it." I said nothing, just slipped my fingers into his. He didn't let go. That night, after the babies were asleep, he kissed me for the first time. No music, no fireworks, just a quiet moment in the kitchen while the dishwasher hummed and the world outside was finally still. And that was the night I realized something terrifying. I was happy, not performative, not distracted, not numb, just happy, which is usually the moment life decides to test you. It came in a plain, white envelope. No return address. Just my name, Sarah Whitman, scrawled in sharp black ink like it had something to prove. Daniel handed it to me on a Tuesday morning while I was making pancakes. "This was in the mailbox," he said. "Looks personal." I turned it over. My hands froze. I knew that handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the counter, next to Jack's sippy cup and a half-eaten banana. I finished cooking. We ate breakfast. We dressed the babies. We folded laundry. But the envelope never stopped staring at me. Finally, during nap time, I sat on the porch and peeled it open. "Sarah," it began, "I heard you're back in Willow Bay. I don't know if you'll even read this, but I needed to say something. I made a mistake, a big one. I was scared and selfish, and I know I hurt you. But I can't stop thinking about you, about the baby. Is he mine?" I stopped breathing. "I want to talk. Please. I've been working on myself. I'm not the guy I was in Boston. I want to meet my son, if he is my son. I deserve that much. Don't I?" Liam, I read it again. Then a third time. The words didn't change. The weight in my chest didn't lighten. Liam, the man who vanished the second I told him I was pregnant. The man who blocked my number, ghosted me, and never once checked if I was alive or dead. Now he wanted to talk. I went inside. Daniel was on the couch, Ava asleep on his shoulder, his eyes watching me like he already knew. "Bad news?" he asked. I handed him the letter. He read it in silence. No expression. No questions. Then, softly, "Are you going to respond?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Do I owe him that?" Daniel didn't answer. He just looked at Ava, then at Jack sleeping in the bassinet beside the couch. "Whatever you decide," he said slowly. "Just promise me you won't let guilt make the choice." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the letter tucked under my pillow like a curse I couldn't shake. What if Liam came to town? What if he demanded custody? What if he used the law like a weapon? What if he was right? Did Jack deserve to know his biological father? Would he hate me one day for keeping the truth from him? I sat in the rocking chair, watching my son breathe, his chest rising and falling, his little hands curled into fists. I didn't have answers, only fears. A week passed. Then two. I didn't write back. Then one morning, Hazel showed up unannounced, carrying a lemon pie and an envelope. "You got another letter," she said, face unreadable. "But this one isn't from Boston." I opened it slowly. "Sarah, this is Eleanor. I know we haven't spoken since you came back. And I know I said things I can't take back. But I heard what you've been doing. The town's talking. About you. About the babies. And I'm sorry. You're not the failure I thought you'd be. You're braver than I ever was. If you ever want to talk, my door's open. Always." My throat tightened. Eleanor, the aunt who kicked me out when I told her I was pregnant. The woman who made me believe I'd ruined my life. And now this. I handed the letter to Daniel. He read it, then folded it neatly and placed it beside the first one. "Looks like the world's trying to crawl back in," he said. "Guess it realized what it lost." I looked at him, at Ava, at Jack, at the house that had become our home. I wasn't the same girl who showed up at Hazel's door that snowy night. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't owe anyone anything. I stood at the edge of Willow Bay, watching the tide pull back from the rocks. The wind curled around my coat, cold and damp, carrying with it the sharp scent of seaweed and salt and something older than both. Behind me, the town was waking up. But inside me, something had already shifted. I had two letters, two ghosts. Liam's full of guilt and demands, and a rewritten version of the past where he wasn't a coward. And Eleanor's shorter, softer, but laced with regret from years too late. Both of them wanted access to a version of me I no longer was. I knew I needed to choose who to answer, who to forgive, who to let go. So I wrote two letters of my own. To Eleanor, I said, "I appreciate your words. I really do. But forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once. It's a hallway you crawl through, and I'm still on my knees. I'm not ready to see you yet, but I'll let you know when I am." To Liam, I wrote only this. Jack already has a father, one who stayed. I never mailed them, but I didn't need to. The moment I sealed those envelopes, the decision settled in my bones like heat after a long winter. I was done carrying what didn't belong to me. That weekend, Daniel surprised me with a picnic on the cliffs behind the house. The sky was the color of old denim, and the air smelled like lilacs. We sat on a blanket, Ava gurgling between us, Jack trying to eat a pine cone. "You okay?" Daniel asked, watching me like he always did, with that quiet intensity that made it hard to lie. I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." "You seem lighter." "I am." He leaned back on his elbows. "You ever think about leaving?" "Leaving what?" "This town. The house. All of it." I thought about it. The Sarah from a year ago would have packed a bag without looking back. But now, not anymore, I said. This is where Jack took his first step, where Ava found her laugh, where I remembered how to breathe. Daniel smiled. Good, because I bought something. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny black box. For a moment, the world tilted. "I'm not asking today," he said quickly. "I know you're not there yet, but someday, maybe." I opened the box. Inside wasn't a ring. It was a silver locket. Inside, 2 tiny photos. "Jack, Ava, I wanted you to have something that proves we're already a family. Even before the paperwork, the promises, the words. I couldn't speak. My throat closed around something too big to name. So I leaned forward, kissed him once, soft, certain, and whispered, "Someday isn't as far off as you think." That night, I tucked Jack into bed and sat with Ava until her breath evened out. Then I slipped the locket over my neck, its weight grounding me like roots under frozen soil. The next morning, I went to the post office and mailed only one letter. To myself. You did it. You survived. You loved. You let go. You grew something beautiful from the ashes. And that is enough. No return address. Just my name, Sarah Whitman, written in my own hand. The first time I ever stood on that porch, I was shaking, pregnant, scared, and soaked from the rain. I remember thinking the house looked like it didn't want me there. The shutters hung crooked. The steps groaned like old bones. It was never meant to be home, just a place to hide while I figured out how to survive. But a year later, that same porch held different sounds. Jack's laugh, Ava's cooing, the soft click of Daniel's coffee mug beside mine on crisp mornings. The house didn't just shelter me anymore. It saw me. I wasn't hiding. I was rooted. Spring had come early that year. The orchard behind the house bloomed in thick clusters of white petals. Jack helped Daniel plant vegetables in the garden, though most of his help meant flinging dirt onto Daniel's jeans and laughing until he fell over. Ava had started to crawl, dragging herself across the floor like a tiny explorer determined to conquer every rug and shoelace. And I had started writing again. Real writing. Not just grocery lists or angry letters never sent. I turned the spare room into an office, dusted off my old laptop, and began shaping the pieces of my story into something more than memory. One afternoon, as I edited a chapter about Eleanor's cold silences, the doorbell rang. It was her. She stood at the gate in a simple coat, clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the gravel path. No accusations, no tears, just two women with too much past and not enough future to waste it. I opened the gate. She didn't step in. "I won't stay," she said, voice trembling like the stems in her hands. "I just wanted to say thank you. For the letter. For not hating me." "I did hate you," I answered quietly. "For a long time. But hate is heavy, and I've been carrying too much." She nodded. "I'm proud of you, Sarah." And then she left. It wasn't dramatic. No hugs, no sobbing forgiveness. But it was real. And sometimes that's enough. 2 weeks later, I got a message from Liam. Not an apology this time. Just a photo, he and his new girlfriend, standing beside a stroller. "This is Mia," he wrote. "Thought you should know Jack has a sister. If you ever want them to meet." I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Jack didn't need more confusion. He needed consistency, safety, love. He already had all three. That night, I told Daniel everything. About the message. The photo. My choice. He didn't ask questions. Just kissed my temple and said, "You did the right thing." By the end of summer, the house had transformed. We painted the porch, repaired the shutters, strung fairy lights along the fence. I filled the kitchen with herbs from the garden and laughter from our new friends. Logan and Sierra came over often, bringing pies and stories and advice on how to get Jack to eat broccoli without theatrics. And on a warm September morning, I opened the mailbox and found a thick envelope from a small publishing press in Portland. They wanted to buy my manuscript, the story of a woman who lost everything and found something better. I cried right there, barefoot in the driveway, Ava on my hip, Jack tugging at my jeans asking for juice. Later that week, I signed the contract on the same table where I used to cry myself to sleep. We celebrated with strawberry shortcake and cheap champagne. Jack spilled whipped cream on Daniel's lap. Ava grabbed a handful of frosting and smeared it in her own hair. I laughed until I couldn't breathe. That night, as the stars blinked over the bay and the breeze smelled like pine and promise, Daniel wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You happy?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, because happy was too small a word for what I felt. I turned to him, rested my forehead against his, and whispered, "I'm whole." We stood there, our children asleep inside, the night wrapping around us like a blessing. Not because everything had turned out perfect, but because I had turned out okay. Because I had walked through fire and built a life from the ash. The text came just after I picked Abby up from school, wedged between a reminder about early dismissal and an alert about a snowstorm sweeping across the state. One line. "That's all Marissa sent. If you're free, you can drop by Saturday night for the holiday party. No, we'd love to see you. No, the kids will love playing with their cousins." Just generic. Sterile. Like it could have been sent to anyone. I stared at it longer than I'd like to admit, willing some warmth to appear if I reread it enough times. It never did. I didn't respond right away. That night, I hovered over my phone more times than I could count, fingers twitching, second-guessing every word I might say. Should I ask what time? Should I offer to bring something? Should I pretend this was normal? Eventually, I typed, "Would it be helpful if I brought a dish? I can make the sweet potato casserole the kids love." Then I hit send. The response was silence. That dull gray delivered sat beneath my message like a forgotten ornament on a tree nobody bothered decorating. The next morning, Abby was spinning in the kitchen, practicing her jingle bell rock routine in her fuzzy socks while Max mashed his cereal into soggy mountains. "Are we going to Aunt Marissa's party?" she asked. "I want to show everyone my dance." Max joined in, humming offbeat and beaming. That was it. The decision was made, not by me, not by Marissa, but by the innocent hope in my children's voices. Hope that hadn't been bruised yet, not in the way mine had. I spent Thursday night wrapping gifts. One by one, I labeled them with hand-drawn reindeer tags. Abby insisted we make one for Aunt Marissa too, even though I hadn't told her about the text. She just assumed we were invited. That's the thing about kids. They expect to be wanted. I pulled out the scarf I'd been knitting for months. It was meant to be Marissa's birthday gift, but I never mailed it. I told myself it wasn't the right color. The truth? I wasn't sure she'd want anything from me, but I packed it anyway. By Friday, the news anchors were chirping warnings. Blizzard conditions possible. One smiled as if it were festive trivia. I sent one more message. Still planning to come by tomorrow evening. Let me know if anything changes. Again, nothing. But this time, I took the silence as permission. Saturday morning arrived sharp and bitter. I loaded the casserole, the gifts, the scarves, and 2 layers of coats into the car. Max was giddy. Abby had already memorized the cousins' names, and I kept saying, "Almost there," even as I gripped the wheel tighter with each mile. 7 hours. That's how long we drove. The snowstorm swallowed the highway in Iowa. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing, and my knuckles ached from holding the steering wheel. My breath fogged the windshield faster than the defroster could fight. There were moments, brief and private, when I considered turning back, but I didn't, because part of me believed, even then, that maybe this year would be different. We pulled into Marissa's street just after dusk. The snow had calmed, but the cold had settled like it had every intention of staying. Abby clutched her handmade card to her chest. Max had already fallen asleep, his cheek warm against my shoulder as I carried him toward the glowing porch. Every step I took was careful, deliberate, like I was trying not to crush the hope I'd carried this whole way. The front door was slightly open. Laughter spilled out like heat from a furnace. But no one was watching for us. No one stepped outside. And deep down, I already knew. The front steps were slick with packed snow. I shifted Max gently in my arms, his tiny boots dangling beside the casserole dish balanced precariously on my hip. Abby walked ahead, her scarf already unraveling in the wind. By the time we reached the door, my gloves were damp and my arms ached from the weight of everything. My son, the food, the unspoken hope I hadn't dared name. I nudged the door open. Warmth hit us instantly, cinnamon and baked ham. laughter echoing down the hallway, polished floors gleaming under twinkling lights. A house prepared for celebration, but not for us. Abby instinctively bent down to wipe her boots on the mat. I followed, scanning the foyer for somewhere to set the casserole. Coats lined the hooks, boots perfectly arranged along the wall. There wasn't a single inch of space left. I held everything and waited. A woman I didn't recognize, wearing a gold cocktail dress and holding a flute of champagne, glanced at me as she passed. "Oh, are you someone's plus one?" she asked, barely pausing before turning away mid-laugh toward another room. I looked at the entry table. A printed seating chart was taped beside a basket of place cards, each typed and neatly aligned. I searched the list again and again. Nothing. No Lauren. No Abby. No Max. "Mom, where's our seats?" Abby asked softly, peering up at me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I walked her toward the coat rack, only to find it full. I ended up draping our coats over one arm while still holding the casserole with the other. The foil was slipping. My scarf, her scarf, was poking out of the gift bag, slightly damp. Aunt Marlene passed by without even glancing at me. She was ushering Marissa's twins toward the dessert table. Abby followed instinctively, like muscle memory guiding her, but was intercepted. One of the other mothers blocked her gently, flashing a tight smile as she whispered something to her daughter and turned them away. I stood frozen in the foyer. Not cold, not yet, just misplaced. Across the kitchen, I finally caught sight of Marissa. Her back was turned, apron tied with perfect precision, laughing as a man beside her poured wine. She didn't glance up, didn't meet my eyes, didn't acknowledge my existence. Then Chloe floated past me, her glass filled with something red and garnished. She leaned in just enough to whisper without pausing. "Marissa didn't think you'd actually come. In this weather." Her smile was polished. Hollow. I adjusted the casserole dish in my grip, nearly dropping it. Still, no one offered to help. No one asked if we needed a seat or a hand or even a welcome. A sudden burst of laughter erupted from the living room. Someone called out a toast. I turned to Abby, who was standing quietly beside me now, her cheeks flushed, her voice barely audible. "Do they know we're here?" I nodded slowly. "I think they know," but my hands were trembling now, not from the cold, but from the sting of recognition. Not forgotten, not unseen, just unwanted. And still I stood there. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't leave. Not yet. Because something in me, stubborn, foolish, faithful, still whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was a place for us somewhere inside that golden house, even if we had to carve it ourselves. The living room was packed. Velvet chairs pulled close together, people balancing paper plates on their laps, glasses clinking gently beneath the hum of a projector. Abby tugged on my coat again, pointing toward the kids' table. Her eyes lit up at the sight of cousins she hadn't seen in a year, seated with juice boxes and candy canes like it was the North Pole. She stepped forward, but a woman I vaguely recognized, one of Marissa's friends from the PDA, stepped in gently, her voice soft and clipped. "Oh, sweetie, that table's for the little ones who RSVP'd." She smiled like she'd just explained something helpful, not heartbreaking. I blinked. "We texted," I said quietly. "Twice." She gave a shrug, so slight it might have been a tick. Must not have been logged. Behind her, I saw Chloe whispering something to another guest. Both glanced toward me. Chloe's lips moved in perfect mockery, didn't think she'd come. Then she giggled, sipping from her wine like the joke had aged beautifully. I turned toward the hallway, heart racing. At the far end of the room, the slideshow had begun. A golden script faded in across the screen. Our family through the years. Photo after photo flashed across the wall. Birthdays, beach trips, holiday tables. Marissa, always smiling in the center, always perfectly lit. Her children, her friends, even old neighbors. But never me, never Abby, never Max. I waited, breath held, for just one image, One fragment of a memory that included us. It didn't come. Then an old Easter photo. I knew it well. We were kids, dressed in pastel dresses on the front porch. I remembered the itch of the lace collar, the way Mom told us to sit close. But on the screen, only Marissa remained. I'd been cropped out, neatly, surgically. Just her, holding her basket, looking flawless. Something sharp twisted in my chest. Abby leaned into me again, her voice small and honest. "Why aren't we in any of the pictures, Mom?" I looked at her and tried to smile. "Maybe we'll be in the next one," I whispered, though we both knew we wouldn't. The projector whirred gently, casting warm light across faces that looked nothing like mine. Across the room, Marissa stood and gave a little bow, glass in hand. "Thank you all for being part of this journey," she said, smiling with effortless poise. "This family thrives because we let go of what doesn't serve us." The applause was immediate, loud, seamless. Chloe dabbed her eyes with a cocktail napkin like they'd just heard a eulogy for dignity itself. Someone murmured, "She's always been the glue." Someone else added, "We're lucky to have her." No one turned around. No one saw me. No one noticed the woman standing at the edge of the room, the one who used to buy the birthday cake when Mom's check bounced, the one who sewed the Halloween costumes, the one who cleaned up after parties where her name never made it on the list. I felt like a ghost, present but unacknowledged, real but revisioned. I didn't cry. Instead, I took a step back, the scarf still folded in my hand. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't forgetting. This was erasure, with intention, wrapped in garland and toasted with champagne. After the slideshow, the lights came up slowly, like the party had exhaled. People shifted in their seats, stood to refill drinks, murmured about how beautiful the memories were. Abby leaned against my side, her paper plate untouched, her eyes still fixed on the screen long after it had gone black. "I thought they said everyone was in the video," she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I led her back toward the hallway. We passed the gift exchange table, now brimming with perfectly wrapped boxes, bows gleaming under chandelier light. A printed sign read Caldwell Family Only. Abby paused, looking for her name. She found nothing. Neither did I. A group of guests nearby was laughing over something Marissa had said. Her voice rose above theirs, crisp, cheerful, confident. "Everyone who confirmed is listed." We had to keep it organized. I cleared my throat. "I did text you," I said. I asked what to bring. Marissa turned slowly. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't sorry. She looked annoyed. "You didn't follow up," she said flatly. "I figured that meant you weren't coming." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. But something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but finally. I walked away without another word. My feet moved instinctively toward the foyer, where coats were now half slid from hooks. Guests laughing as they shook snow off boots they hadn't worn in hours. Abby was waiting by the staircase, sitting with her hands folded in her lap, eyes staring at the floor. I sat beside her and handed her something I'd found on the entry table, a name tag. +1 Abby. Scribbled in Sharpie, barely legible. No last name, no reference to me, just an afterthought. "What's this?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just something that doesn't belong." I stared at the guest list again. My name still wasn't there. And this time, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a message. Abby leaned into me as the hum of conversation picked up around us. "Can we go home now, Mom?" I crouched to her level, brushed a loose curl from her forehead, and smiled as best I could. "Not yet, but soon." She nodded. Even she could feel it, the weight in the air, the tension that hovered despite the candles and carols. Back by the refreshment table, Marissa was introducing Chloe's new boyfriend to a circle of friends. I stood just a few feet away. No one looked at me, not even accidentally. I could have been wallpaper. Chloe's boyfriend asked, "Is everyone here family?" Chloe chuckled and, without missing a beat, answered, "Oh, we all have our roles here." Some people support from the sidelines. Her voice didn't cut. It didn't need to. It slid under my skin with precision, like she'd practiced the line. A caterer passed behind me and said, "Excuse me, can you move that tray closer to the drinks?" I stepped aside without thinking. It wasn't until he looked again that he realized I wasn't staff. "Oh, sorry," he mumbled. I gave a short nod. No apology needed. The damage was already done. At the fireplace, Marissa raised her glass once more. "Just a quick toast," she called out. "To those who make this possible. Mom, for her wisdom, myself, for pulling it all together, and to the friends who remind us what real family feels like." A pause. No mention of me. Then she added, "This family thrives because we let go of what doesn't serve us." My stomach turned. People around her nodded like disciples in a quiet church. By the dessert table, Abby was still searching for her name on the place cards. I walked over. It wasn't there. Only Marissa's kids. And the cousins. Not my daughter. Not my son. I turned to the assistant, setting up the area. "Excuse me, was this a mistake?" She smiled with rehearsed sympathy. "We just included the children who RSVP'd formally. It helps with head count." "We did speak," I said. "I texted. Twice. Well, I guess it didn't get logged." Marissa appeared behind her, smiling like it pained her. "You always make things harder than they need to be, Lauren." That sentence, she'd used it before, whenever I challenged her, whenever I showed up without apology. I looked at Abby, standing quietly, her hands clasped, her hope shrinking by the minute. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. But I picked up the scarf from the gift bag, folded it neatly, helped Abby into her coat, wrapped Max's jacket around him where he still sat, half asleep on the couch. And I turned to Marissa one last time. If I had known silence was the price of belonging, I would have spoken up sooner. She opened her mouth to respond, but I was already walking. We stepped into the cold, and the door shut behind us with the kind of softness that hurts more than a slam. The snow had thickened again, swirling under the porch light in slow, deliberate spirals. Max stirred in my arms, his cheek pressed to my shoulder, still unaware. Abby followed me in silence, her boots crunching the salted driveway, her scarf now dragging slightly behind. We reached the car. I buckled Max in first, kissed his forehead, then turned to Abby. She was staring out the window, her eyes wide, that same stillness in her body I'd only ever seen after a nightmare. I reached for her gloves. They weren't there. Not in her coat pocket. Not on the seat. She must have dropped them inside. I hesitated. They were just gloves, cheap ones, too small already. But I couldn't leave them. Not after everything else that had been left behind tonight. "I'll be right back," I told Abby. She nodded without looking up. The door creaked as I re-entered the house. Music still played, now softer. Jazz Christmas, something smooth and too polished. The guests had mostly moved to the back of the house. The hallway was empty except for the faint echoes of clinking glass and overlapping laughter. I found the gloves near the staircase, where Abby had been sitting earlier. As I bent to pick them up, I heard my name. "She was always the storm," Marissa said. Her voice drifted from the kitchen, calm and clear. "We built peace without her." Zania's voice followed. "You handled her perfectly tonight. Honestly, I don't know how you do it." Marissa gave that little sigh she reserved for her most performative humility. She thrives on drama, but she knows better than to start it in front of me. They laughed. Soft, clean, satisfied laughter, like they'd just toasted to keeping their kingdom unshaken. I stood still, gloves in hand, chest tight. I didn't move until I heard another voice, one I hadn't expected. My mother. "I mean, it's been a hard year for her," she said. A pause. No defense. No challenge. Just complicity. I stepped away, back toward the hallway, my feet moving without thought. A little cousin was standing on a chair by the window, peeking through the curtains. When he saw me, he smiled and waved. I waved back. He didn't know. Not yet. He still believed everyone belonged. I turned toward the kitchen just as Marissa raised another toast. To those who actually show up, emotionally and otherwise. The crowd chuckled. Zinnia clapped. Even my mother smiled. It wasn't cruel. Not overtly. But it was knowing. That soft, suburban weaponry, wrapped in grace, tied with expectation, passed off as unity. My hands were no longer shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't walk back in. I just turned, slipped out the door, and let it close behind me with finality. Outside, the air was sharp enough to cut, but it still felt warmer than the house I had just left. When I climbed back into the car, Abby looked at me with quiet expectation. I handed her the gloves. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the snow, but I didn't move yet. I just sat there, watching the house disappear in the mirror. Lights glowing in every window, but none of them were for us. That night, after the kids were asleep, I brewed a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The house was silent, but inside me, something had begun to stir. Not rage, not grief, resolve. I opened my laptop. I didn't name names. I didn't accuse. I simply wrote what happened. How it felt to drive 7 hours through a snowstorm, to arrive unacknowledged, to stand in a foyer with no place to set down your coat, your food, or your existence. I attached the photo of the name tag +1, Abby. The picture of the seating chart. A blurry still from the slideshow where half my arm had made the frame, but nothing else. Then I typed the first line. Some families erase with silence. Others do it with planning. I hit post. I didn't expect anything to happen, but within the hour, everything did. The post didn't explode. Not at first. It sat there, quiet and still, like something waiting to be noticed. But then, slowly, comments began to appear. "This is heartbreaking." "I saw that video. I thought something was off." "Thank you for saying what so many of us feel." By morning, my inbox was full. Private messages from people I barely remembered, distant cousins, former co-workers of Marissa, a woman who'd been at the party 2 years ago. "I noticed the seating chart," she wrote. "I didn't know if it was my place to say anything, but I saw it." One message came from someone I hadn't thought about in years, a woman who worked at the same nonprofit Marissa often bragged about supporting. She wrote, "Thank you. Your story made me rethink a lot of things." Then came the text I knew would arrive eventually. From Marissa, "You're being dramatic. Take the post down before you embarrass everyone." I stared at her words. I read them again and again, the same way I used to reread her party invitations, hoping, searching for warmth that was never there. This time I didn't hesitate. "No," I replied. "I'm done hiding the truth." She never wrote back. Later that day, a neighbor dropped off groceries. No note, but I recognized the handwriting on the shopping list tucked inside the bag. It was my mother's, her way of saying something without actually saying anything. A loaf of bread, my favorite tea, Max's granola bars. Not love exactly, but something like it. I didn't text her. I didn't say thank you. Not because I was angry, but because the message had already been delivered. We were speaking in a language of silences now, and for the first time I understood its grammar. Zinnia posted a video the next day. I didn't watch it all. I didn't need to. "It's so easy to misinterpret things," she said to the camera. Sometimes people feel excluded when really they just isolate themselves. The comments didn't go the way she'd hoped. I was there. She wasn't imagining it. You don't get to erase someone and then blame them for disappearing. She posted proof. Sit down. By the weekend, the video was gone. I didn't gloat. I didn't even screenshot it. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about release. The silence that used to crush me had shifted. It no longer wrapped around me like a fog. It insulated me. Kept me from feeling guilty for telling the truth. Kept me from needing anything from people who didn't want to give. I went grocery shopping with Abby that Sunday. She grabbed a can of whipped cream and whispered, "Hot cocoa tonight?" "Absolutely," I smiled. Two women in the frozen food aisle glanced in our direction. One gave me a polite nod, not sympathy recognition. I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. Istut taller. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not because they saw me, but because I finally saw myself. Sometimes vindication doesn't come with fireworks or applause. Sometimes it walks beside you in quiet places, like the checkout lane or the walk to the car, or the moment you slip gloves onto your daughter's hands and realize you didn't lose anything real. You just let go of what never loved you back. 2 weeks passed. The snow that once blanketed the streets had started to pull back, revealing slushy grass and the tired remnants of winter. I moved through each day with quiet steadiness. School pickups, groceries, folding laundry, phone calls with clients. Ordinary things, but something inside me had changed. I no longer checked my phone for an apology that wasn't coming. I no longer replayed the slideshow in my head, trying to find my face in photos where I'd been erased. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and my old journal. I hadn't opened it since before the divorce, but that night the words came. I spent years trying to earn something that should have been mine by birthright. A seat at the table, a name spoken without hesitation, a place that didn't need defending. I paused, then added, "Belonging doesn't have to be earned. If it does, it isn't real." I closed the journal and looked around my home. Toys scattered under the couch, crumbs on the floor, the sound of Max snoring down the hall. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And in that moment, the silence inside me wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. A week later, while waiting for Abby outside school, another mom approached me. I recognized her vaguely, Annette, I think. She looked unsure, almost nervous, then said under her breath, "I read your post. Thank you. You told a story a lot of us don't have the courage to share." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just nodded. It was enough. That night, I met with a small group of women at the library. Some neighbors, some from town, a few strangers who'd reached out privately. We didn't start with therapy or healing mantras. We started with stories. Some brought tears. Others brought cookies. I brought both. We called it the uninvited circle. Not as a joke, but as a truth we'd earned. Every Thursday, we met in that quiet corner room. No one had to prove their pain. No one had to explain why they felt like the outsider at a table meant for them. We didn't promise healing. We promised to witness. And sometimes that was more than enough. A month later, Abby brought home an art project, a family tree. At the center were 3 names, Abby, Max, and me. No aunts, no grandparents, no fillers, just us. I framed it, not because it was complete, but because it was honest. One Saturday afternoon, we ran into Marissa outside the market. She was dressed in a pristine beige coat, walking beside a woman I didn't recognize. Our eyes met for a moment, and she looked away. I didn't. I smiled, not out of spite, not from superiority, but because I wasn't broken anymore. She could carry her silence if she wanted to. It didn't belong to me. That evening, I opened my journal again. I flipped back to that line I'd written just after the party. "I'm done begging to be seen." Underneath it, I added, "Now I build places where others feel visible." On Sunday, we went to the park. The air was crisp but kind, and the kids ran through the damp grass like it had never been covered in snow. I caught them mid-laugh, snapped a photo, Abby's cheeks pink, Max's curls catching the sunlight. That night, I printed it, slipped it into an envelope, wrote one sentence on the back. "This is what family looks like to me." No caption needed. Then I mailed it, not to ask for connection, but to draw a line between what was and what I had become.